Time did a strange thing in that moment. It didn't stop exactly. It stretched, like the universe had decided that this particular second deserved more room than seconds usually get. There are people who walk into a room and own it, and then there are people who walk into a room and survive it. Marcus Webb was the second kind. He stood at the edge of the most expensive ballroom he had ever seen in his life, wearing a suit that belonged to his neighbor Gerald, shoes he had polished 3 times that morning, and an expression that said he was one wrong look away from turning around and walking straight back out the door he came in through. He was not supposed to be here. He knew it. His body knew it. The way his shoulders sat slightly too high, the way his eyes moved around the room without settling anywhere, all of it said the same thing. This is not your world. Crystal chandeliers hung above him like frozen waterfalls. Men in tailored tuxedos laughed with their whole chests. Women in gowns that cost more than his annual salary floated from conversation to conversation like they had been born knowing exactly what to say and when to say it. Waiters moved through the crowd with silver trays, offering things Marcus couldn't name and definitely couldn't afford. He was scanning the room looking for someone, anyone, who might point him toward a contact, a name, a thread he could pull, when it happened. The music softened, not completely, just enough, like the room itself had taken a breath and forgotten to release it. And then a voice, deep, certain, the kind of voice that had spent 60 years learning that it never needed to be raised to be heard, cut through every conversation in that ballroom like a blade through silk. Marcus Webb. Everything stopped. Not almost stopped. Stopped. Glasses paused halfway to lips. Laughter died mid-sentence. Heads turned. Security guards straightened. A woman near the entrance grabbed her husband's arm without looking at him because her eyes were already moving toward the source of the voice and toward the man the voice was aimed at. At the center of the room, standing beside a table draped in white linen and surrounded by some of the most powerful people in the state of Maryland, was Elliot Hargrove, 71 years old, silver-haired, worth somewhere north of $4 billion depending on which publication you asked. He was looking directly at Marcus with an expression that nobody in that room, not his foundation directors, not the senators who competed for his attention, not his own staff, had ever seen on his face before. It wasn't anger, it wasn't confusion, it wasn't the polite but carefully measured look he gave the powerful people who filled these events every year, hoping proximity to him would make them more powerful still. It was recognition, deep, personal, almost reverent recognition, like a man who had been waiting a very long time to see a particular face walk through a particular door. The crowd parted, not because they were told to, because that is what crowds do when someone moves through them with that kind of quiet authority, the kind that doesn't announce itself or perform itself, the kind that simply exists in a person the way gravity exists, not asking to be acknowledged, simply operating whether you recognize it or not. Hargrove was walking toward Marcus, not gesturing for someone to bring him over, not sending a staff member, walking, himself, through the center of his own gala, through 200 of the most important people in Maryland, with the particular unhurried certainty of a man who had spent 60 years understanding that the most significant moments in life always deserve your personal and undivided presence. No delegation, no intermediary. Himself, Marcus stood completely still. His heart was doing something he did not have adequate language for. Not panic exactly, not excitement exactly, something older than both, something that lives in the body below the level of named emotion and communicates only in the vocabulary of heat and stillness and the sudden acute awareness that something is happening that will divide your life into before and after. And in that moment, with 200 pairs of eyes moving between him and the most powerful man in the room, one question hung in the air above all of them like smoke that nobody could wave away. Who is Marcus Webb? Welcome to True Spark Stories. While you're here, please hit the subscribe button and tell us where you're watching from, because what you are about to hear is not just a story. It is proof that a single moment of quiet human kindness can travel further than money, further than power, further than anything the world tells you actually matters. Stay with us, because the answer to that question, who is Marcus Webb, is going to take everything you thought you knew about what changes a life and turn it completely upside down. Now let's go back, not months, years, 9 of them. Baltimore, Maryland, November. The kind of cold that doesn't ask permission before it finds you. Marcus was 25 years old, running on 4 hours of sleep, a gas station coffee, and the particular determination of a man who has decided that exhaustion is not a valid reason to stop. He drove for a rideshare app on nights and weekends. During the week, he worked as an orderly at Mercy Medical Center, cleaning rooms, transporting patients, doing the invisible work that kept the building breathing. Neither job paid enough on its own. Together, they almost did. Almost was the word Marcus lived inside of back then. He had just found out that week that he was going to be a father. The woman he had been seeing, Danielle, had told him over the phone, not in person, over the phone, and then gone very quiet on the other end, waiting to hear what he would say. He had said, "Okay, I'm here, we'll figure it out." She had exhaled like she had been holding that breath for a week. He hadn't told her that after he hung up, he sat in his car in the hospital parking lot for 30 minutes in the dark, asking God a series of questions he did not expect answers to. He was not ready. He knew that clearly and completely. But he also knew that not ready and not willing were two entirely different things, and he had made his choice before the phone call even ended. So on that cold November night, Marcus was driving, picking up fares, running numbers in his head the way he always did. Rent, diapers, formula, the secondhand crib his coworker Sandra said she'd sell him for $60 if he could collect it by Sunday. The app pinged. New fare, downtown pickup, hotel address, destination, listed as a residential area 20 minutes out. Marcus pulled up to the hotel entrance and watched a man in an expensive wool coat climb slowly into the back seat like his body was significantly heavier than it looked. The man smelled like expensive whiskey and something else, something that Marcus, who had worked enough night shifts to recognize it immediately, identified without hesitation. Grief. The man smelled like grief. "Evening," Marcus said. The man said nothing, just stared out the window as the city moved past them in the dark. Marcus drove. He didn't push conversation. He had learned early that some passengers needed silence and some needed sound, and the real skill was knowing which was which without being told. He watched the city move past the windows. He did his numbers in his head. He let the quiet sit. But 10 minutes into the drive, something changed. Marcus glanced in the rearview mirror and felt something shift in his chest that had nothing to do with the road ahead of him. The man was not just quiet. He was not tired or distracted or lost in thought the way passengers usually were. He was somewhere else entirely. Somewhere dark and very far away. And the particular stillness he carried in his body, the way his hands sat open in his lap like they had forgotten their purpose, the way his eyes tracked nothing outside the window even as the city moved past in lights and color, Marcus knew that stillness. He had seen it on patients, on the ones who had stopped fighting not because the fight was over but because they had quietly decided that losing was easier than continuing to try. It was a specific kind of absence. The kind that had nothing to do with peace and everything to do with a decision that had already been made somewhere private. Marcus kept driving for 2 more minutes. Then he pulled over. Not at the destination. Not at a gas station or a junction. Just over. Onto a quiet side street lined with bare November trees, where the only light came from a distant street lamp and the soft pale glow of his dashboard instruments. The man stirred, looked around at the unfamiliar street. "Why are we stopped?" "Because," Marcus said simply, "I don't think you actually want to go where you're going." Silence, long and loaded. "You don't know anything about where I want to go." "No, sir," Marcus said. "I don't. But I know what a man looks like when he's riding somewhere just to have somewhere to ride to, and I'm not dropping you off until I know you're okay." The man stared at the back of Marcus's seat. Then he laughed. But it wasn't a real laugh. It was the sound a laugh makes when all the joy has been completely drained out of it, and only the hollow shape of it remains. The kind of laugh that is actually a confession. "Okay," the man repeated, like the word was in a foreign language he had studied once and mostly forgotten. "I don't remember the last time I was okay." Marcus turned slightly in his seat so he could see the man properly. He was older than Marcus had first registered, early 60s maybe. His coat was expensive, his watch was expensive, his shoes were expensive, his hands were the hands of a man who had spent decades making decisions that moved large things. But his eyes were absolutely bankrupt. Empty in the specific way that has nothing to do with stupidity and everything to do with a man who has run completely out of reasons. "You want to talk about it?" Marcus asked. The man looked at him, a long evaluating look, like he was trying to determine whether this young stranger in a rideshare car at 11 o'clock on a Tuesday night in November was someone worth speaking honestly to. Then he said, "I want to not exist for a while. That's what I want." Marcus felt the full weight of those words land exactly where they were aimed. He didn't panic. He didn't reach immediately for his phone. He didn't recite a crisis number in a careful, practiced voice. He sat with it, let it exist in the space between them without trying to immediately make it smaller or safer or more manageable than it actually was. "I hear you," he said finally. "I've had nights that felt like that." The man looked at him sharply. You're what, 25? 25, yes, sir. What does a 25-year-old have to feel like that about?" Marcus was quiet for a moment, choosing not what to say, but how much truth to offer a stranger in the dark. Then he said, I found out this week I'm going to be a father. I'm behind on rent. I work 2 jobs and I still do math before I buy groceries. And tonight I'm sitting in this car trying to figure out how to give a child a life that I'm not sure I know how to build." He paused. "So I don't know everything about that kind of darkness, but I know something about it." The man held his gaze for a moment, then looked away, and when he spoke again his voice was different, quieter, like something had shifted slightly in the room of him. A window opened somewhere, just slightly, just enough for a little air. "I had $4 billion last year," he said. Marcus said nothing. "Let it come. I built a company from nothing. 38 years, took it public, watched it become something I was genuinely proud of." His hands moved slightly in his lap, not gesturing, just restless. "And then I made a mistake, one significant catastrophic mistake in judgment. And in 14 months it was gone. The company, the board, the people who had called themselves my friends for decades." He stopped, swallowed. "My wife left in August. My son, I haven't spoken to my son in 3 years. 3 years, over something I said in a moment of anger that I would give every remaining thing I owned to take back and never said." He looked back out the window, the bare November trees, the quiet street, the distant lamp throwing a circle of orange light onto the pavement below it. "So you tell me," he said softly. "What exactly is left to be okay about?" Marcus thought about it. He genuinely, carefully thought about it, not performing consideration, but actually doing it. The man could tell. Something in the quality of Marcus's silence was different from dismissal or discomfort. It was the silence of someone taking a question seriously enough to sit inside it before answering. "Your son," Marcus said finally. "He's still alive?" The man blinked. "Yes." "Then there's a phone call you haven't made yet." Marcus said it simply, not as inspiration, not as a speech, as plain observable fact. "That call still exists. You haven't made it, which means it's still possible." He paused. "And possible, even small possible, that's not nothing." The man stared at him. "I know it doesn't feel like enough right now," Marcus continued. "I know from where you're sitting, it probably feels like almost nothing. But almost nothing and nothing are not the same thing, and the difference between them is everything." What happened next was not dramatic. There was no sudden transformation, no moment of cinematic revelation. The man did not straighten up and declare himself saved. He simply exhaled, long and slow and trembling slightly at the very end, like a man who had been holding something unbearably heavy for so long that he had stopped noticing the weight, and someone had just quietly pointed out that he was allowed to set it down for a moment. Just a moment, just enough to breathe. They sat together on that quiet side street for 47 minutes. Marcus talked about Zoe before she was born, about the specific terror of loving someone you haven't met yet, about deciding, in a hospital parking lot in the dark, that terrified and willing were not mutually exclusive. The man talked about his son as a small boy, how he used to fall asleep in the car on long drives, how the man would carry him inside and stand in his doorway for a few minutes just watching him breathe, and how somewhere between that boy and the silence of 3 years he had made decisions he could not explain and said words he could not unsay. Neither of them solved anything. Neither of them tried to. They just sat together in the particular way that 2 people can sit together when one of them is drowning and the other refuses to pretend not to notice. When Marcus finally pulled back onto the road and completed the drive, the man was different, not fixed, not healed, but present, like someone had turned a light back on in a room that had been dark for a long time, and the room was remembering what it looked like with light in it. At the destination, the man sat for a moment before getting out. Then he reached into the inside pocket of his wool coat and produced a business card. He leaned forward and pressed it into Marcus's hand with both of his own. The gesture was deliberate, like a man transferring something he needed the other person to keep safe. "If you ever need anything," he said. His voice was steadier now. It belonged to someone who intended to still be alive next week and the week after that. "And I mean anything at all. You call that number." Marcus looked down at the card. Simple, cream-colored, heavy stock, embossed lettering that caught the streetlight. Elliot Hargrove. The name meant nothing to him. He slipped the card into his shirt pocket, said goodnight, and watched the man walk slowly but deliberately up to the front door of a brownstone and disappear inside. Marcus sat there for one quiet second. Then he opened the app, accepted the next fare. He had a crib to save $60 for, a child coming in 8 months, a life to figure out how to build from whatever materials were available to him. He forgot about the card before he got home. If you're still watching up to now, type "I'm still here" in the comment section and tell us. What would you have done in Marcus's place? Would you have pulled over? Would you have said anything at all? Or would you have driven in, silence, and delivered a stranger safely to a door that might have been the last one he ever walked through? Think about that carefully, because the answer says something true about you, and because what that 47 minutes set in motion across 9 years, what it quietly built in the dark while Marcus wasn't watching, is the part of this story that will stop you completely, and it is still coming. 9 years is a long time, long enough to forget a business card, long enough to forget a name on a cream-colored card pressed into your hand by a stranger on a cold November night, long enough to build an entire life out of scraps and stubbornness and love and still feel, on the hard days, like you are one bad month away from everything coming apart at the seams. Marcus did not forget that night on the side street. He thought about it sometimes, the way the man's hands had sat open and purposeless in his lap, the way his voice had sounded when he talked about his son as a small boy, the way he had walked up to that brownstone door with the careful deliberateness of someone relearning how to move through the world one step at a time. Marcus thought about it and hoped the man was okay. That was all, just hoped, because Marcus did not have the luxury of carrying other people's stories for very long when his own story demanded everything he had every single day. Zoe arrived in July, 7 pounds 4 ounces, with her father's nose and her grandmother's eyes, and a cry that Marcus heard from the hallway and immediately began doing the thing he had promised himself he would not do in a hospital. The nurse brought her to him and he stood there holding the 7-pound person under the fluorescent lights, thinking one thing with his entire body. I would burn down the entire world for you. I would also rebuild it, whichever one you need. Danielle stayed for 2 years. She tried. Marcus tried. But trying and working are two entirely different things, and eventually she sat across from him at the kitchen table one evening and told him that she thought Zoe deserved parents who were honest with each other. And the most honest thing she could say was that she was not built for this version of this life. He did not beg her to stay. He asked her one question. Are you staying in her life? She said yes, and she meant it. She showed up on weekends, paid what she could, called when she said she would call. She was not a villain. She was simply a person who understood her limits clearly enough to name them out loud, which Marcus respected even when it hurt. So he raised Zoe, mostly alone, with help from his mother Patricia on the hard days and from Gerald next door on the impossible ones. He packed her lunch every morning with a handwritten note tucked beside the sandwich, something small, something true. You are brave. You are the best thing I ever did. Your dad thinks you hung every star in the sky. She kept every single one of them in a shoebox under her bed. He didn't know that until she was 6 and showed him the box one quiet evening with the solemn pride of someone revealing a treasure they had been guarding for a long time. He had cried in the bathroom afterward so she wouldn't see. The 2 jobs became a rhythm. Orderly on weekdays, rideshare on weekends. He got a small raise at the hospital after 3 years. Not enough to change anything, but enough to change the feeling of things slightly, which sometimes matters just as much. He moved to a slightly better apartment. Still small, still aging at the edges, but with a working heater and a landlord who fixed things within a week of being asked, which in Baltimore was not nothing. For a while almost was close enough, and then the building was sold. A development company bought the entire block in January. Letters went out in February. The language was polite and completely merciless, the way that legal language always is when it is being used to take something from someone who cannot afford a lawyer to argue back. Tenants would need to vacate within 90 days or face rent increases that Marcus read 3 times because he was certain he was misreading them. He was not misreading them. He started making calls to housing authorities, to tenant rights organizations, to his bank about a personal loan that was declined within 48 hours without explanation, as if the rejection was so routine it didn't warrant one. He sat at the kitchen table after Zoe had gone to sleep and spread papers across the surface, and did the math 17 different ways, hoping the 18th arrangement would give him a different answer. It never did. He had 60 days left on the clock when the letter arrived. It came on a Tuesday morning, plain white envelope. No return address, his name and address written in clean, precise handwriting that belonged to someone who had learned penmanship in an era when penmanship was considered a reflection of character. He almost set it aside with the utility bills, something he would not be able to explain what, not then and not later, made him open it first. Inside was a single card, cream-colored, thick and substantial in the way that things are when they cost real money and are made to last. Gold embossed lettering across the front, the Hargrove Foundation Annual Gala, a celebration of community and human dignity, Saturday, March 15th, black tie, by invitation only, and at the bottom handwritten, in the same clean, precise script as the envelope, a single line that Marcus read twice before it fully registered. We hope you will join us, Mr. Webb. You have earned your place in this room. Marcus turned the card over. Nothing on the back, no explanation, No contact number beyond the foundation's general line printed in small type at the bottom edge. He read the front again. Then he held it and sat with it the way you sit with something that doesn't immediately make sense but feels in some unnameable way important. The name Hargrove was familiar in the distant way that very prominent names are familiar. You have seen it on a building, caught it in a headline, heard it mentioned in a conversation that didn't concern you. It lived in a different universe from his own. He did not connect it to a wool coat. He did not connect it to a cold November night 9 years ago, or a business card in a shirt pocket, or 47 minutes on a quiet side street with bare trees and a distant orange lamp. He held the card over the recycling bin for a full 10 seconds. Then Zoe walked into the kitchen in her pajamas, rubbing one eye with the back of her hand, and stopped when she saw what he was holding. "Daddy, what's that?" He showed her. She took it from him with both hands and studied it with the intense focused seriousness of a 7-year-old confronting a document of obvious importance. She turned it over, turned it back, ran her thumb across the gold-embossed letters the way people touch things they find beautiful. "It's fancy," she said. "It is. Are you going to go?" "I don't think it's really meant for me, baby." She looked up at him, her grandmother's eyes, clear and direct and carrying in them, even at 7 years old, the particular quality of someone who does not accept weak answers to honest questions. "It has your name on it, Daddy," she said. "How can it not be meant for you if it has your name on it?" Marcus looked at his daughter, then at the card, then at the stack of eviction paperwork sitting in the corner of the table like a quiet threat that had learned patience. A co-worker, Sandra, who somehow knew everything about everything, had mentioned once that the Hargrove Foundation gave housing grants to single-parent families, that the foundation had helped dozens of Baltimore families with deposits and rent, and the specific kind of financial gap that swallowed good people whole before anyone noticed they were gone. She had also said the applications were permanently closed unless you had an inside contact, that it was all relationships, that you had to know someone. Marcus didn't know anyone, but he had an invitation with his name on it in someone's personal handwriting. He put the card on the counter, made Zoe's breakfast, sat across from her while she ate, and watched her the way he always watched her in unguarded moments, like someone studying a thing they cannot believe is real. Then he got her dressed, packed her bag, wrote her lunch note, "Today you're going to do something that surprises even you," and dropped her at school. He came home to the empty apartment, the papers on the table, the 60-day clock ticking in the walls. He picked up the card. He thought about Gerald's suit. He thought about the bus route downtown. He thought about the way Zoe had said it. "It has your name on it, Daddy," as if the logic were so simple that only an adult could manage to miss it. He made his decision. He was going, not for the chandeliers or the champagne or the chance to stand in a room full of people who would look straight through him. He was going because his daughter had 60 days before she lost her home, and Marcus Webb had never once in his entire life sat down and waited for circumstances to improve without first doing every single thing within his power to make them improve himself. He called Gerald, asked to borrow the suit. Gerald said yes without asking a single question, which was exactly the kind of neighbor Gerald had always been. On Saturday morning, Marcus polished his shoes 3 times. Zoe sat in the bathroom doorway in her pajamas eating a piece of toast, watching him with complete fascination the way children watch adults perform rituals they don't yet understand. "You look handsome, Daddy." "Thank you, baby. Are you nervous?" He looked at her reflection in the mirror, 7 years old, shoebox of lunch notes under her bed, the reason he pulled over on cold November nights without knowing why, the reason he did everything. "A little," he said. "Don't be," she said simply, taking another bite of toast. "You're the best person I know." He finished polishing his shoes, kissed her forehead, left her with his mother, took the bus downtown because parking near the venue would have cost $40 he needed for something else entirely. He walked into that ballroom and immediately felt every eye that was not looking at him, which was somehow worse than the ones that were. He was looked through, stepped around, subtly redirected. A woman in pearls asked who he represented. A man in a tuxedo handed him an empty glass, assuming without a moment's hesitation that he was service staff. A security guard tracked him from across the room for 4 full minutes before apparently deciding he wasn't worth the approach. Marcus kept moving, looking for someone approachable, someone connected to the foundation's housing work, a name, a contact, anything he could follow like a thread. He found nothing. After 40 minutes of being invisible in a room full of people, he decided he had made a mistake, that the invitation was a clerical error or a misunderstanding, or simply one of those small, cruel jokes that life occasionally plays on people who are already carrying too much. He should go home, regroup, find another way. There was always another way. He just had to find it. He turned toward the exit, and the music softened, and across the room, in a voice that needed no introduction and required no volume to command every corner of that ballroom, came two words that stopped time. Marcus Webb. Time did a strange thing in that moment. It didn't stop exactly. It stretched, like the universe had decided that this particular second deserved more room than seconds usually get. Marcus turned around slowly, not because he was calm, because his legs had made a quiet unilateral decision to move carefully while the rest of him was still trying to understand what was happening and why the most powerful man in the room was standing at the center of it, saying his name like it was something he had been saving up for a long time. Elliot Hargrove was walking toward him. The crowd parted, not because they were told to, because that is what crowds do when someone moves through them with that kind of quiet authority, the kind that doesn't announce itself or perform itself, the kind that simply exists in a person the way gravity exists, not asking to be acknowledged, simply operating whether you recognize it or not. Hargrove was not hurrying. He moved through the center of his own gala, through 200 of the most important people in Maryland, with the particular unhurried certainty of a man who had spent 60 years understanding that the most significant moments in life always deserve your personal and undivided presence. No delegation, no intermediary, himself. Marcus stood completely still. His heart was doing something he did not have adequate language for. Not panic exactly, not excitement exactly. Something older than both, something that lives in the body below the level of named emotion and communicates only in the vocabulary of heat and stillness and the sudden acute awareness that something is happening that will divide your life into before and after. Hargrove stopped 3 feet in front of him. Up close he was different from the silver-haired figure Marcus had seen from across the room, more lined, more present somehow, like a man who had been through something large and survived it and carried the survival in his face rather than hiding it. But his eyes were extraordinary, clear and steady and carrying in them something that Marcus could not immediately name, but felt somewhere behind his sternum like a hand pressing gently against a door. Hargrove extended his hand. Marcus shook it. His own hand was steadier than he expected it to be. "Mr. Webb," Hargrove said, quietly now, just between the two of them. The room was watching, but the room was no longer part of this conversation. "I wasn't sure you would come. I wasn't sure I was supposed to," Marcus said. Something moved across Hargrove's face, not quite a smile, deeper than a smile. The expression of a man who has imagined a moment for years and is now standing inside it and finding that it is exactly what he hoped it would be, and somehow more. "You were always supposed to," Hargrove said. "It just took me 9 years to find you." Marcus felt those words arrive in his chest before his mind fully processed them. "I'm sorry." Hargrove looked at him for a long, steady moment. Then he turned slightly and said something quietly to the man standing nearest to him, a foundation director, who nodded immediately and began with calm efficiency guiding the immediate circle of onlookers back into their own conversations. The music, which had dropped to almost nothing, gradually recovered its volume. The room began breathing again, but people were still watching, sideways, over shoulders, behind the rims of glasses raised to lips that had stopped moving mid-sentence, because whatever was happening between Elliot Hargrove and this man in the slightly too large suit was visibly not finished and visibly not ordinary. Hargrove gestured toward a quieter corner of the room, a small seating area near a tall window that looked out over the Baltimore skyline. The city spread below them in lights and darkness and everything in between. They sat across from each other in chairs that probably cost more than Marcus's monthly rent. Neither of them noticed. "I need to tell you something," Hargrove said, "and I need you to hear all of it before you respond. Can you do that for me?" "Yes, sir," Marcus said. Hargrove leaned forward, clasped his hands together in his lap, and began. "November, 9 years ago, you picked me up outside the Meridian Hotel downtown. You drove for about 10 minutes, and then you pulled over on a side street off Charles Avenue. You told me you weren't dropping me off until you knew I was okay." He paused. "Do you remember that night?" Marcus went very still. Something was moving through him like a hand moving slowly through dark water, searching for something dropped a long time ago in a place that had since gone cold. A wool coat, open hands sitting purposeless in a lap. A man who smelled like whiskey and grief, and a decision already made somewhere private. 47 minutes, bare November trees, an orange street lamp throwing a circle of light onto wet pavement, a business card pressed into his palm with both hands. "I remember," Marcus said slowly. The words came out carefully like he was handling something fragile. "I remember you." Hargrove nodded, held his gaze. "I was going to hurt myself that night." He said it simply, directly, the way men speak when they have practiced saying a true thing out loud enough times that most of the shame of it has finally burned away, and what remains is just the truth, plain and survivable. I had made a plan. I had decided, and then a 25-year-old rideshare driver with 4 hours of sleep and a child on the way pulled over on a side street and refused to take me where I was going until he knew I was okay. The ballroom continued around them. Glasses clinked. Laughter rose and fell in the middle distance. Someone gave a small toast near the bar. The world kept moving in the ordinary way that the world keeps moving while extraordinary things happen in its corners. Marcus said nothing. There were simply no words immediately available to him. "You talked to me about your daughter," Hargrove continued. "She wasn't born yet. You talked about being terrified and choosing to try anyway. About how possible, even small possible, was not nothing." He stopped for a moment. When he continued, his voice was lower. "I have thought about that word every single day for 9 years, Mr. Webb. Possible. You gave me that word on a side street in November when I had completely run out of my own." Marcus felt something shifting behind his eyes. He held it, kept his face steady, kept breathing. "I went inside that night," Hargrove said, "and I called my son." He paused, looked down at his clasped hands for a moment, a brief, private moment. When he looked back up, his eyes were bright, but his voice was controlled, the control of someone who has learned at great cost how to hold difficult things steadily. "We talked for 4 hours. It was the hardest conversation of my life, and simultaneously the most necessary one I have ever had. We have been rebuilding our relationship ever since, slowly, imperfectly, the way real things get rebuilt." He looked at Marcus directly. "He is here tonight, actually. He stepped outside about 20 minutes ago. I would very much like you to meet him before the evening is over, if you're willing." Marcus pressed his lips together, nodded once. It was all he could manage. "I tried to find you," Hargrove said, "almost immediately after that night. But you had switched rideshare platforms and moved apartments, and I only had a first name from the receipt." Something that was almost amusement moved briefly across his face. "It took my team 3 years to get a confirmed full name, another 2 years to get a verified address. You are not an easy man to locate, Mr. Webb." "I wasn't hiding," Marcus said. His voice came out rougher than he intended. "I know," Hargrove said. "You were simply living, which is exactly what I hoped you were doing every single day we were looking." Hargrove reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and produced a small envelope, cream-colored, the same weight and texture as the invitation that had arrived at Marcus's apartment on a Tuesday morning, with no return address. He held it across the space between them. Marcus took it, opened it carefully, unfolded the document inside, read the first line, stopped, read it again, then looked up at Hargrove because he needed confirmation from another human being that he was reading what he thought he was reading and not constructing something out of desperation and hope. "That is a housing grant," Hargrove said quietly, "fully approved and fully funded, sufficient for a deposit and 12 months of rent in any qualifying residence in Baltimore City or County. It is yours, Mr. Webb. Unconditionally and without any terms of repayment. It has been approved and waiting for 2 years. I was simply determined to give it to you in person." Marcus looked back down at the document, at the numbers, at the signatures, at the foundation seal pressed into the bottom corner like something official and permanent and real. His hands were not steady anymore. "I have a daughter," he said. Not as information, not as explanation, simply as the only thing that came when he reached into himself for words, the only thing that was always true and always there regardless of everything else. "I know," Hargrove said, and his voice when he said it was so gentle that it was almost unbearable. "Zoe, she is 7 years old. She attends Garland Elementary. You pack her lunch every morning and leave her a handwritten note. Your neighbor Gerald watches her on your late shifts. Your mother Patricia helps on the days that are too heavy for one person." He paused. "I told you it took time to find you. Once we did, we wanted to understand fully who we were helping and why the help was warranted. Something about hearing her name in that room, in that chair, in that conversation. Something about hearing Zoe's name spoken by this man in this context cracked something open in Marcus that he had been keeping carefully sealed and carefully protected for 7 years. He was a man who had learned early that falling apart was a luxury unavailable to him, that Zoe needed him solid, that solid meant private, that private meant carrying the fear and the exhaustion, and the specific grief of raising a child alone in a world not designed to make it easy, carrying all of it quietly, internally, without display, without burdening anyone with the weight of it, because the weight was his and he had accepted that. He had been solid for 7 years. And then Elliot Hargrove looked at him across the narrow space between two chairs in the corner of a ballroom and said 4 words that took every wall Marcus had ever built around that solidness and dismantled them, not with force, but with the precision of someone who had been given the exact right key. "You can rest now." Marcus turned his face slightly to the side. His jaw tightened. His shoulders rose once and came back down. And then quietly, with the particular and complete dignity of a man who has earned every one of his tears and refuses to waste a single one of them on anything less than the absolute truth, he let himself feel it. All of it, at once, without filter or management or control. The double shifts, the lunch notes, the math that never quite added up no matter how many times he ran it, the school play he missed and cried about alone in his car, the bathroom tears Zoe never saw, the 60-day notice sitting on the kitchen table like a quiet, patient threat, the borrowed suit, the bus ride downtown, the 47 minutes on a cold side street 9 years ago when he pulled over for a stranger, because something in him, something that had no name and needed none, simply could not drive past a person who was disappearing. He felt all of it arrive at once, and across from him, Elliot Hargrove, billionaire, foundation chairman, father, man who was alive and present and sitting in this chair because a young stranger had refused on a cold November night to mind his own business, sat completely still and let him feel it, did not look away, did not fill the silence, did not offer anything except his steady, unhurried presence, which was, Marcus would later understand, exactly what he had given Hargrove 9 years ago on a quiet side street. Presence, just presence. The most underrated thing one human being can offer another. Marcus composed himself the way he always did, quietly, completely, like a man carefully folding something precious and placing it back in the exact place where it belongs. He straightened in his chair, cleared his throat once, looked back at Hargrove with eyes that were red at the edges but clear and steady at the center. "I didn't do anything special that night," he said. "I just pulled over." Hargrove shook his head, slowly, deliberately, the way a man shakes his head when he has been waiting a long time to correct a specific misunderstanding and wants to make sure the correction lands properly. "You pulled over," he said, "when every reasonable instinct you had was telling you to keep driving. You had a long night ahead of you, a life already asking more of you than it had any right to ask, a child coming that you were terrified about, nothing to gain and no reason at all to stop." He held Marcus's gaze. "Do you know how many people drove past me that evening before your car pulled up?" Marcus said nothing. 7, Hargrove said quietly. 7 people looked directly at me standing outside that hotel and made the calculation, consciously or not, that whatever was happening to me was not their concern, not their problem, not their lane. He paused. "You were the 8th, and you made an entirely different calculation. Not because you had more than they did, not because it cost you less, but because of who you are." He leaned forward slightly. "That is not a small thing, Mr. Webb. That is the whole thing. That is everything." Marcus looked down at the grant document still held between his hands. The paper was thick and real and solid in the particular way that things are when they represent something that has taken years to finally arrive. "Does Zoe know you came tonight?" Hargrove asked. Marcus almost smiled. "The first time all evening. She's the reason I came. She saw the invitation and told me it had my name on it, so it must be meant for me." He paused. 7 years old and already significantly smarter than her father. Hargrove smiled then, a full, genuine one that reached all the way up into his eyes and stayed there. "She sounds absolutely extraordinary." "She is," Marcus said, simply, without performance or qualification. "She really, truly is." They sat together for another quiet moment in that corner, while the gala moved and breathed around them like a living thing that had resumed its business and decided to leave these 2 men alone inside their own separate weather. Then Hargrove stood. Marcus stood with him. "There is someone I would like you to meet," Hargrove said, "if you're ready." He led Marcus back through the room. And this time it was different. This time Hargrove walked beside him, not ahead, not directing, beside him, shoulder to shoulder, through the center of the ballroom, and the room felt the difference immediately. The same people who had looked straight through Marcus an hour ago, who had handed him an empty glass and tracked him with security eyes and asked him who he represented in the tone people use when they already believe the answer will disappoint them. Those same people watched him now with an entirely different quality of attention, the kind reserved for someone who has been quietly and publicly claimed, by someone whose claiming means something. Near the entrance to the ballroom, standing beside the tall doors with a glass of water, and the relaxed, self-contained posture of a man entirely comfortable standing alone in a crowded room, was someone Marcus had not noticed before. About 40 years old, dark-haired, sharp-eyed. He had his father's jaw and a stillness about him that was clearly inherited. He straightened when he saw Hargrove approaching, and then his eyes moved to Marcus and something shifted in them. A recognition not of Marcus's face but of what Marcus's presence in this room on this evening represented. His father had told him the story. Marcus could tell from the way the shift happened, not surprise exactly, but arrival. Like a man watching something he has been told about for years finally become real in front of him. "James," Hargrove said, "this is Marcus Webb." James Hargrove looked at Marcus for one full second. Then he extended his hand, and when Marcus took it, James held it with both of his own in the way that people hold a handshake when a handshake is not sufficient for what they are trying to communicate, but is the only instrument currently available. "My father has talked about you," James said. "For 9 years he has talked about you." "I didn't know that," Marcus said. "I know you didn't." James held the handshake for an extra beat. His voice was steady, but the steadiness was deliberate, the steadiness of someone managing something real happening underneath. "I want to say thank you for pulling over, for staying, for the 47 minutes. He stopped briefly, collected himself. "I had 3 years of silence with my father that I could never recover. 3 years of a relationship suspended over words said in anger that neither of us knew how to climb down from. And then one November night, a stranger pulled over on a side street and sat with my father long enough for him to remember that possible was not nothing." His jaw tightened briefly. "I have had 6 years of my father because of that. 6 years of Sunday dinners and phone calls and watching him meet his grandchildren and being in the room when he laughs." He released Marcus's hand finally. "So, thank you, genuinely and completely. Thank you." Marcus nodded. His throat was doing what it had been doing all evening, and he let it. The three of them stood together for a moment that none of them would ever entirely find words for afterward. An unlikely triangle of men connected across 9 years by one cold night, one decision, 47 minutes on a quiet street, and the particular invisible thread that runs between human beings when one of them chooses, against logic, against convenience, against every reasonable argument for simply driving on, to show up completely for another. Then Hargrove turned to Marcus one final time. "The grant covers everything you need for the transition," he said. "My assistant will contact you first thing Monday morning with the full details and next steps. There are no conditions attached, no repayment terms, no strings of any kind, no reporting requirements. It is simply yours." He paused. "The foundation also runs a mentorship program for single parents navigating career transitions. I think you would find it valuable, but that is entirely your choice and entirely your timeline, no pressure of any kind." Marcus looked at him. Really looked at him, the way you look at someone when you are trying to memorize something about them that you know you will need to carry forward. "Why did you do all of this?" he asked. "The years of searching, the invitation, all of it. You could have simply mailed the grant." Hargrove considered the question with the full seriousness it deserved. He didn't answer quickly. He sat inside it for a moment, the way Marcus had sat inside his question on that side street 9 years ago before answering. "Because," he said finally, "I built a foundation called the Hargrove Foundation for Human Dignity, and it would be a profound and inexcusable hypocrisy to run an organization dedicated to human dignity while knowing that the man who restored mine when it was completely gone was losing his home 60 days at a time." He held Marcus's gaze. "And because good things should find good people, they don't always. The world does not reliably arrange itself that way. But when I have the capacity to make sure that they do, in this case, in this moment, with this particular man, I consider that not a choice, but an obligation." Marcus held the grant document against his chest, pressed it there against his heart the way you press something you are afraid of losing. He nodded. That was all. It was enough. He stayed another hour. He ate food he couldn't name and didn't particularly taste. He talked to James about daughters and about the specific brand of exhaustion that comes from loving a child, more than you have resources for, and James laughed the way people laugh when something is both deeply true and deeply survivable. And for a little while, the son of a billionaire and the single father who drove rideshare on weekends were simply two men talking about their kids in a corner of a room, and there was nothing separating them that amounted to anything real. He took the bus home. He sat in the back with the grant document folded carefully inside his jacket, pressed against his chest the entire ride. The city moved past the windows the way it always did. Baltimore at night, complicated and luminous and broken in places and extraordinary in others, exactly like every city, exactly like every person who has ever tried to build something real inside of one. He got home at 11:30. His mother was asleep on the couch with the television murmuring softly to itself. Zoe was in her bed, buried under her blanket with one arm flung out to the side the way she always slept, completely, trustingly, like a person who has no doubt whatsoever that the world will still be there and still be safe when she wakes up in it. Her shoebox of lunch notes was visible under the bed frame in the narrow light from the hallway. Marcus stood in her doorway, just for a moment, just to watch her breathe, the way he had done every single night of her 7 years without exception, the way he suspected he would do for as long as she allowed him to and possibly longer. Then he reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out the grant document, looked at it one final time in the dim hallway light, the numbers, the signatures, the foundation seal, all of it real and solid and permanent and his. Then he reached into his shirt pocket. His fingers found something small and rectangular and soft at the edges from years of being moved from drawer to pocket without purpose or destination. Carried the way we carry things we cannot explain holding on to. He pulled it out, cream-colored, embossed lettering, 9 years old and still completely intact. Elliot Hargrove. Marcus stood in his daughter's doorway holding a business card he had been given on a cold November night by a stranger he had pulled over for, because something in him simply could not drive past a person who was disappearing. He had never thought of that night as significant. He had never catalogued it among the important things he had done, because he was not the kind of man who kept a running account of his own goodness. He did what he did because it was there to be done, because the moment presented itself and he responded to it with everything he had, which on that particular night was not much. 4 hours of sleep, a gas station coffee, a child on the way, and 47 minutes he could technically not afford to give. He had given them anyway, and those 47 minutes had been traveling forward through time while he wasn't watching, quietly, steadily, building something in the dark the way seeds build, not asking to be remembered, not requiring any acknowledgement of their existence, simply becoming, slowly and without announcement, what they were always going to become when the conditions were finally right. He slipped the card back into his pocket, walked to Zoe's bed, sat carefully on the edge of it. She stirred slightly and then resettled without waking, the way children do when they sense the presence of safety without needing to open their eyes to confirm it. He leaned forward, whispered into the quiet of her room, not loud enough to wake her, just loud enough to mean it completely. "We're going to be okay, baby girl." And for the first time in longer than he could accurately remember, when he said those words, they were not a promise he was making to hold himself together. They were not a performance of confidence for a child who needed to believe her father had things under control. They were simply true. 2 months later, on a Saturday morning in May, Marcus Webb and his daughter Zoe carried boxes through the front door of a 2-bedroom apartment in a quiet neighborhood, 3 blocks from a park and 4 blocks from a school that Zoe would later describe, with complete authority, as the best place she had ever been in her entire 7 years of living on this earth. The apartment was not large, but it had good light. It had a working heater. It had a kitchen where a man could stand in the morning and pack a lunch and write small true things on small pieces of paper and know that somewhere in the building there was a shoebox that would keep them safe for as long as his daughter decided they were worth keeping. Zoe ran through every room, claiming each one, filling them with herself the way children fill spaces, completely, immediately, without reservation or hesitation, as if ownership is simply a matter of presence, and she had always known that. She came running back to the front door where Marcus was standing with his hand resting on the door frame and grabbed both of his hands in both of hers and looked up at him with her grandmother's eyes. "Daddy," she said, "is this really ours?" She squeezed his hands once, hard, the way she did when something mattered all the way, and then released them and ran back into the apartment. And he stood in the doorway and listened to the sound of her footsteps moving through rooms that were theirs, filling a life that was theirs, running toward a future that was theirs, built not on luck or inheritance or the accident of being born into the right room, but on 47 minutes on a cold November street when a young man with nothing in his pocket but a forgotten business card chose to pull over for a stranger because he was, at his absolute core, the kind of person who pulls over. Do you believe in destiny? Or was this all just the mathematics of a good man making good choices in the dark, with no promise of return and no audience and no reason except that it was right? We think you already know your answer, and we think your answer tells you something important about yourself. Because somewhere in your life, maybe recently, maybe years ago, maybe in a moment so quiet you almost missed its significance, you had a choice, a stranger in front of you who needed something you could have given, and you either pulled over or you didn't, and you have carried the weight of whichever decision you made ever since. That is the thing about 47 minutes. They never really end. They just keep becoming something. In the dark, without asking permission, without needing you to remember them to continue doing their work. If this story moves something in you, If it reminded you of something true about what human beings are capable of when they choose each other over convenience, then share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Because stories like Marcus's don't travel nearly far enough in a world that is far too loud with the wrong things. Subscribe to True Spark Stories. We are here every single week with stories about ordinary people who did extraordinary things, not because they were powerful or prepared or certain it would matter, but simply because they were human enough to try. And we will see you in the next one.